Is the Ukrainian counteroffensive continuing to make progress? But is Russia pushing its own offensive? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's June 17th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get right into it. Okay, first and foremost, as you can see, guys, I'm sort of moving offices. So if things look and sound a little different, that's why. But, you know, bear with me. We should be set up here in the next day or two. But when we look at the control map, the biggest change is actually that we're reporting that Ukrainian forces, again, are advancing, not necessarily down this line here towards Staromayorsk and Oruzhane, but are instead attempting a flank, right? Going around the outside, pushing these open fields here, which may be an indicator that the Ukraine may feel it's past some of the most dangerous minefields that Russia has laid in some of its open terrain. As we've talked about, the largest fortification line still remains along here, Remgivka, Volodine, Staromilinivka, and Kremenchuk, right? Based on some of the maps we've seen, that this is where Russia has really dialed in its largest and most robust fixed defensive positions. But it may be a sign again that Ukrainian forces feel they can flank around and cut off some of these forces that are occupying these towns. It's worth noting again that there's high ground here to the west, and that this is almost certainly low ground. And so if Ukraine can occupy some of these regions, they may find that these forces here are going to be forced to withdraw as they're pinned against this high ground, right? It's very hard if the enemy is facing you for you to advance up a hill away from them. It can be tough. And you may see that that's maybe Ukraine's goal here, or possibly they just have realized that it's simply too hard to dig through and dislodge the enemy from these urban or like villages where sometimes the fighting can get very vicious and house to house. And instead, they're relying more on maneuver warfare. So I think that may be what we're seeing here. But the if you're curious about what the fighting actually looks like, well, I can't show you here, but I have done reaction videos on combatvetnews.com. Join the 1% of the 1% who are members and get access to my exclusive combat footage breakdowns. I just did analysis of some of the viral CivDiv drone footage that just dropped. It's pretty sick. So if you want to become a member, check the card over here or the link in the description, or go to combatvetnews.com. Okay, so when we look at the combat map, this is what I thought was so interesting. You can see, again, Russia finally perhaps starting to really implement some economy of force. You can see they're continuing to shell here. They are continuing to shell all along the Zaporizhzhia axis, also shelling in Kherson, which is interesting. It indicates that they believe, I suppose, that Ukraine may attempt to still cross this river here and try to take Kherson, or the remainder of Kherson Oblast, which is something that I really have a hard time conceiving of being militarily effective, simply because it's so hard to cross even low rivers via a narrow number of bridges. If you thought breaking through this defensive line was tough, imagine being channeled to this narrow axis, just trying to force your way across like the Antonovsky Bridge, and then try to dig out Russian troops who are themselves dug in Olesky. It seems like completely unfeasible. So I'm not sure why Russia continues to operate like that's a real viable option. But what's interesting is to see in Donetsk, this seems to be where Russia has fixated its offensive efforts. 36 combat engagements, but only in this small area here. This, you may recall, is where the Russian, or the Kremlin rather, has tasked the Chechen forces to actually finally engage in some frontline combat, and that they're expected to be taking the fight to the Ukrainians. And by some accounts, they appear to be. According to War Mapper, outside of Avdiivka, Novoselivka, looks like Russian forces are advancing somewhat to the north. You can see here's Avdiivka, here's this northern prong, and Russian, or more likely Chechen, forces are making some gains north of Novoselivka. But when we look at the map, you guys can see that Novoselivka itself is not of exceptional value, right? It's located, looks like it's located around here. Small enough, there it is. There's Novoselivka. So you can see that, well, if they're advancing up this railroad, this may have some value as it approaches New York. But more likely, it looked like they were advancing into these fields or these very small villages, areas that don't confer a ton of tactical value. So I suspect this may simply be gains for the sake of gains, which happens sometimes. Yeah, especially if they're moving northwest from Novoselivka, you're making gains into low value territory. Not to sit there and say that, Ukraine isn't also right now making gains in relatively low value territory, but it's fairly clear why they're doing it. Whereas in this case, it's not really clear that this is part of a larger objective. The encirclement of Avdiivka, in contrast, is actually an objective, but you can see that the northwest corner here, this doesn't encircle Avdiivka, and it doesn't really pressure New York. Nothing's going to get surrounded. It's just not clear what objective this serves, other than the Chechen forces proving to the Kremlin that they're capable of launching offensive actions. Other than that, guys, the only big update is that from the UK Ministry of Defense intelligence update, where they're actually reporting that Russia has reinforced its attack helicopter force in the region. An extra 20 attack helicopters are at Berdyansk Airport, 100 kilometers behind the front lines. And Russia, even they're acknowledging that in aviation and counter-aviation forces, Russia has likely gained an advantage in southern Ukraine, with attack helicopters employing long-range missiles against ground targets and avoiding the close in combat that sort of defined the early phase of the war, where they took a lot of casualties. But worth noting, again, Berdyansk is way in the south here. And so again, these helicopters are not entering the front lines. They're trying to use long range close air support, which in these sort of engagements is possible. In urban areas, long range helicopter launched missiles like that, they're just not that precise. So if you're talking about house to house fighting in Staromayorsk, for example, that's unlikely to be able to be supported with this sort of CAS. But these battles here with considerable distance between fortified positions, that can really make CAS very, very effective. So anyway, guys, that is all I had. Of course, as always, a big thank you to our Patreons. Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks to our Colonel tier members. You guys are awesome. Thanks to all of our Lieutenant tier members. I appreciate each and every one of you guys being the 1% of the 1% supporting me on combatvetnews.com. Catch you in the next one.